Health savings accounts, also known as HSAs, are one of the best vehicles to help cut healthcare costs. And they also come with some pretty nice tax benefits. But how do HSAs work? On this IBD Explains, we ask, what are HSAs and what do investors need to know about them? And here with me to break things down is IBD's personal finance and management editor, Matt Krantz. So, Matt, what are HSAs and what would investors use one for?
HSAs, or health savings accounts, are gifts from the government, basically. These are awesome ways to save money for retirement, which is an onerous task for almost everybody. And it's a way to get a tax break while you make these difficult savings decisions in a special account called an HSA. You can set them up on your own, or you can set them up through your employer.
And what's the difference then between an HSA and a flexible spending account?
That's a great question. HSAs are superior, in my opinion, to FSAs in many ways. FSAs are flexible savings accounts. So HSAs, one of the great things about them is you put money in, but you don't have to take it out. With an FSA, you have to take it out every year or the money just kind of goes away. Additionally, the limits are a little higher for HSAs in most cases, and they're much more flexible. You can actually invest the money that's in your HSA, whereas an FSA, you're basically putting it in a pot and someone else is investing it.
Now, I think you might have mentioned this, but if you're self-employed, can you open up an HSA or do you have to open one through your employer?
You can, and it's a great way for people that don't have access to 401ks to save money. You will have to set it up yourself through like a large brokerage firm, like one of our best online mutual fund and brokers through IBD, but it's definitely possible.
Now, you said that these were gifts from the government. So what are some benefits then of an HSA?
The key to the HSA is the triple tax benefit. So you get a break on federal taxes going in, as it grows, and when it comes out. And you really can't find that in much other places, except maybe in some college savings, but it's definitely, this puts the HSA on a class of its own. We do have to be clear, and we can talk about it later, that we are talking about federal tax shields for the triple tax protection.
So Matt, you kind of alluded to this, but can you invest your HSA and what's the best way to do that?
That's a really tricky question. There's a couple of different approaches. So some people will put as much money in their HSA as possible, stuff it to the gills. Even if they need to pay a medical bill, they won't use the HSA account and they'll let it get huge. And it will be money that's kind of long-term. In those cases, you can put it in stocks or long-term or even speculative investments because you're a long-term investor. But other people like to pull out the money to pay for expenses and they want the money to be there. In that case, you'll probably want to be a little bit more conservative because you don't want to invest it in a stock market like the S&P 500, and the S&P 500 goes down and then you have a bill and you don't have the money to pay it. So it really depends on how you're going to use the HSA account.
Now, you mentioned that triple tax benefit, but are there any pitfalls or things to consider, and do those benefits extend across state lines?
That is a great question. And most of the time it does. And most of the time you get a triple tax protection for both federal and state. However, that's not the case in California and New Jersey. In those states, there are special rules that take away from those rights. It depends on your tax limits, but generally speaking, you do not get to deduct those contributions, and it does not grow tax deferred or tax protected. So, but you got to keep in mind that it is still federally protected, so you're still getting a benefit.
Then what are the main takeaways then for investors who might be interested in opening a health savings account?
I think these things are great. I actually think they're underrated. If you really pressed me to decide whether or not to put money in an HSA or maxing out a 401k, I might actually lean toward the HSA. After you've gotten advantage of your match from your employer, if it's available in your 401k, it's really tough to beat that HSA. And here's a little trick that people do that a lot of people don't know you can do. If you want to get these things as big as you can, because you have to remember, this year you can only contribute $3,850 per individual and $7,750 per family, plus $1,000 if you're 55 or over. That's not a whole lot of money. But if you let it sit in there and you don't actually use it for your health expenses, it can get pretty big, and you can invest in the S&P 500 and really grow it. The key is you don't have to take money out based on the year that your health expense was incurred. So what a lot of people do is they will pay for their health expenses out of pocket, let this HSA just get gigantic, and then in 5 or 10 years later, then they pull out the receipts of the health costs that they had. And you can do that and pull the money out many, many, many years later.
Well, Matt, great insights as always. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.